In this video, we're going to talk about the importance of the UV baked border size. I've gone ahead and constructed just a very simple scene here that contains just a regular kind of household daybed. Now, I've already gone ahead and made the UV maps, and I've created just some very simple textures in Photoshop. But today, what I want to talk about is the importance of the UV baked border size. Now, if you look at my UV map over here, very clean UV islands all the way across the board, but there is little gaps between them. We want that. We want those little gaps. So the UV baked border size comes into play when we bake out texture information from Modo that we can use over in Photoshop, okay? So I want to be able to bake out some surface ID maps, an alpha map, maybe even an ambient occlusion map from Modo that I then can use when making all of my textures in Photoshop. So I'm ready to go. As you can see over here, I've already created a render output for the surface ID output, the alpha output. I've already created a number of materials for each one of my separate parts that will help make all the colors of my surface ID maps special over in Photoshop. That's an important one. You'll see that in action here in a minute. So let's get ready to go. Let's just bake something and I'll show you what's going on, okay? So I'm going to go to my item list, select my item. I can see that my UV map selected, so let's just bake something. So render, bake to render outputs, and there we go. So now we're off to the races, and we're done. Okay, so what I want you to look at here very quickly in the render view is that with a UV baked border size set to 0, you can still see that little gap in between the separate UV islands. All across the board, there's that little gap, and those gaps are a reflection of the actual gaps between the borders of the different islands. You can see it. There's one island there, there's another island there. So at a size of 0, a baked border size of 0, the edges of all of our alpha little islands here don't get extended at all in the actual image map. Now, there's a reason we want to change this. Let me show you where we can change it before we talk about the reason. So if we go up here to Modo, Preferences, we can open up, we'll get this little panel. There we go. And where we're going to go is right here where it says rendering, and there's a lot of crazy stuff in here, but the one that we're the most particularly interested in is the bake UV border size. This is the one that I want, okay? And right now it's set to 0. So with the value of 0 is not going to extend the borders of our alpha little islands over here or our surface ID islands in the image itself. It's going to be a pixel perfect representation of the UV islands. Now, let me just increase this value. And let's just kind of overcrank it. I would never go this high. I'm going to go all the way up to 6. But just to illustrate what it in fact does, this is going to extend the borders of all of our UV islands in the baked texture map, okay? So let's just render it again with a different UV baked border size. Now, before I hit go, okay, put your eyeballs like right here on the map, okay? That way you can see that there's two separate UV islands here. There's this guy, and then there's this guy down here at the bottom. So watch right here when I bake this guy. Okay, so here we go. So it bakes everything, still honoring. Then once it's done, bam, it expands all of our UV islands out by 6 pixels. Okay. Now this is kind of an interesting thing, and let me show you why we want to manage this. With a baked border size of 0, like that, what we're going to produce is a pixel perfect representation of this image of all of these little islands. And they're going to match the exact size of our UV islands in the computer and over in Photoshop. Now, if it's at 0, we create little light leakages. We create little holes in our texture map. So let me bake it again at 0. And we're going to bring this over into Photoshop, and I can show you what's going on. Okay, so there it is at 0. It didn't extend it. Awesome. So let's save a layered image, and I already have a project file going. So here's my textures, and this is just a habit that I've gotten into. I create a folder called Sources, and for me, all the source materials are the images that I use to help create the final diffuse texture map. So let's just call this, I don't know, Pat's bed, and this is the alpha, and oops, spelled alpha wrong, alpha, and the surface ID pass. Okay, there we go. Let's jump over into Photoshop real fast. There it is, and I've already started constructing all of my texture map. And if you look carefully at what I have here, this top layer, this is the actual UV map itself that I exported from Modo. Turn it on and off. Just applied a very simple stroke layer style to make it kind of a lovely little purple. Here's my ambient occlusion pass that I've already baked, and then I have all of my separate layers themselves. Okay, so here's the layer that I need to manage. Now this is a problem for me, and the reason I want to cut it off is that this image is extending into the bed rails down over here for this one. Okay, so I gotta have some sort of system that controls it. Now I know you guys are probably saying, "Oh, Pat, why don't you just layer it?" Well, if I could do that, but you're always going to be running into opportunities or situations, as I should say, that isn't going to allow you, or that won't be solvable or fixable by just changing the layer order. So we need to have some sort of mask on this layer itself that cuts out this image in the exact same shape as our UV islands. Okay, I'm just going to do a place. Let's go find my texture. Oops, wrong folder. There we go. Here's Pat's bed, textures, sources. There's our guy. And it's just going to place it. Looks like it didn't get the right size. So let me just bring this down a little bit. And I want to zoom out a little bit too. Or actually, you know what? It might have gotten the right size. I want to zoom out some before I place it, just to ensure that I'm getting an accurate placement of my object. And let's see. Yep, that might be it right there. Let's just double check. Nope, I was wrong. There it is. Voila. Now I'm good to go. Okay, I like that. Looking perfect. Okay, so we're going to use this this alpha information here to very, very quickly generate some masks. So bear with me just for a moment. I'm going to jump over and I'm going to turn some stuff off and jump over into my channels, okay? And from here, I can just select the black and white images, and I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to grab with the magic wand tool all of these guys and create a new alpha channel, and we're going to call these bedposts. Bedposts, and I'll do this. We'll put 0 on there to represent that this is a baked border size of 0. Okay. Now that I have a new alpha channel, I can fill that alpha channel with my selection. There we go. And then select it one more time and apply that selection to the actual image itself. Okay. Because this is going to be a mask. Voila. Perfect. Okay. Let's turn all this this other stuff back on and save this out. I already have all this applied to my model. So when I save out a new version of this, it'll just automatically update in Modo, which is pretty rad. There we go. I'm a big fan of PNGs. Let's jump back over into Modo. It's automatically recognized that the texture has been updated, and it's asking me to reload it. Yes, absolutely. Let's get rid of some of this stuff here. Okay, so with the UV baked border size, this is our inherent problem. Okay, check it out. On the bedpost itself. Now, even though we have pixel perfect, accurate UV islands or representations of our UV islands over in Photoshop, we have holes, we have leakage, and we want to avoid this. So check it out. See how we're leaking through here? This white line is the background color, or the transparency color, excuse me, of the image map. Coming from Photoshop in that PNG file. We don't want to see this, and so we want to get rid of those. And it's all over. It's at every single seam in my UV map, so I gotta hide those. Now, the fastest way to resolve this is just by changing the UV baked border size. Okay, so we're gonna go back to my Modo preferences, and instead of having a baked border UV size of 0, let's change it to 1, and we'll rebake. Okay, so render. Bake to render outputs, and it's doing its thing. Now watch, right when it's done, watch right here. It's gonna expand it. See how the moment it finished rendering, it popped out and expanded it. So let's save our layered image once again, and we're gonna let's put on this new one. I'm gonna keep it the same name, but I'm gonna put a 1 after it to represent that this is a baked border size of 1. Save, and then if we jump back over into Photoshop. Let me show you another great way of adding images to an already existing document. If I go open, I want to open up that new Photoshop document that I just changed. And this is how I actually prefer to work. I have my new document. I'm just going to select the layer that I want to import. I'm going to left click and drag it into the other document that I have open while holding the shift key like that. Bam. Okay, perfect. So let's see. Here's the new layer that I just imported in. I'm going to rename it I'm just going to add a 1 next to it so I don't confuse it with anything else. The one right above it, this is the UV bake border size of 0. So we're going to get rid of that lovely guy and turn off everything else. Here we go. And channels, and we're basically going to redo the bedposts. Okay, so I want to delete that mask. Okay, create a new one, and then from the actual channel itself, we'll just do the. Looks like it's not letting me do my magic wand here, and there's a reason why it's not letting me do my magic wand. Both as far as the pixel density is concerned, these are right on top of each other. Okay, so it's seeing this as one contiguous, white chunk, if you will. So. Thus enter the importance of Surface ID, which I love. Okay, so I'm going to grab that Photoshop document once again that I showed that we just baked out. Now we imported the alpha output. We're going to import the Surface ID. There we go. And from the Surface ID, we can use the magic wand for selection, color selection. I love using this. This is like my favorite feature of all time, okay? And this is ultimately why I bake out all of those Surface IDs, because there's certain situations where the alpha output just isn't going to give you what you want. Surface ID allows us to very, very quickly select the different colors just using the magic wand. Okay, so you can already see from the selection color here that it's 1 pixel further away. So let's go find my bedposts, and I'm just going to overwrite that color for the mask itself. I'm going to hit Command or Option Backspace to fill that mask with black, and now I'm going to fill it with white, like that. Yeah, that looks quite good now. So if we save it, and we want to make sure that's not off. These are the 2 images that we just baked. Everything's looking good. So if we save this once again, let's just do save as PNG. I'll keep it named the exact same thing, so it overwrites the texture that's already been applied to our model over Modo. Let's gonna save it. Let's jump back. We'll reload it, and you've probably already noticed, yeah. All those leakages, all those holes in our texture maps have now been resolved. Generally, what you want to do, and the technique that I've employed and have used 1,000 times, is that for Surface ID and alpha outputs, I generally have that set to a UV bake border size of 1. Everything else, I either put on 2 or 3. I've noticed that when you're baking ambient occlusion passes, 3 is a good number to shoot for, and because if you have it at a lower number, you run the risk of getting black outlines around your UV islands over in Photoshop. So by having it as a UV bake border of 3, it's going to push out the white, if you will, of your ambient occlusion path just a little bit further, and just ensures they don't get those ugly black borders around all of your stuff. Okay, so UV bake border is just a really kind of handy back end, super geeky preference that has a big impact on how we can work with these images over in Photoshop.